In today's Farm Report, fall harvest season is underway. Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office shares some timely fall harvest safety tips.
Just a short reminder today that we're moving into harvest time, and this is both for farmers and for people that maybe aren't farming and on the road. Is as we move into harvest, if we remember, and we kind of sometimes forget from year to year how many hours that people work and how busy our farms are. It looks like we're going to have a big harvest this year. And of course that means we'll be working more hours and there's more crops to take out of the field. So just as a reminder of people that may be living out in the country and not working with farmers, you're beginning to see, or you've probably seen already, corn silage implements driving up and down the road. After corn silage, we'll be hauling manure on several of those fields. You'll see corn and beans also come out. So just if you're on the road, be respectful of the farmers. This is really important. This is their one time a year that they have an opportunity to get off those crops. So it really is important for them, and they need to work long hours in order to get the crops off. That means at light nights we'll be out on the road. Most of our farms are doing a much better job of making sure they're slow moving vehicles, flashing lights. So if you see them, just slow down and remember you need to share the road with them, and it's only for a few months now that we're on there. From a farming standpoint, remember it's important to properly train all especially if you're working with children and they're pretty new to this, remind them how important it is to be safety. Make sure you wear protective footwear, close, tight-fitting clothes around machinery so we don't have sleeves and things falling around that can wrap in many of our moving parts. And then wear bright-colored, highly visible, reflective clothing. I think a real positive that I've seen on many farms now, especially farms with employees, you can buy these yellow vests, a lot of times with reflective tape on. I would encourage everyone to go out and get those, especially if you're working at night. They really show up really nice, and it's just really easy to see people in those situations. Take frequent breaks. As I mentioned earlier, we're working a lot of hours, but we still need to eat. We still need to get our sleep and really try and get good sleep, so it's important to do that. Make sure you drink plenty of water. Don't try to live on Mountain Dew. Try to get a good meals in. Again, try to get adequate rest if you can when you're sleeping. Provide proper maintenance. Now's the time to get all your equipment ready so you're ready to go at harvest, so you'll minimize the number of breakdowns. And so remember and when you're going through that and maintaining equipment, make sure you put the shields back on or go through and double check the shields to try and provide a safe environment, because there's nothing that's worse than when you run into accidents as we're working during the fall busy season. Sometimes from carelessness, sometimes they're just accidents do happen. This has been Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension in St. Cloud.
The Agriculture Department's comprehensive plan for any future outbreak of high-path avian influenza states that when a detection is made in a flock, the flock should be depopulated within 24 hours. However, when you're dealing with a layer facility that could have as many as 2.5 million birds on one property,
it is very, very difficult with standard methods to do that sort of depopulation.
Dr. T.J. Myers with USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, he says a standard method usually is a water-based foam, which would cover all the birds in the house and result in a quick, struggle-free death within 7 to 10 minutes. But doing that quickly on a large scale, very challenging.
So what we do talk about in the plan is a process whereby the house is sealed, heat is applied to the house, and the ventilation system is shut off, and that causes the birds to die within 30 to 40 minutes.
Myers says that method might meet with opposition on some fronts, and so
we only go to that method after all other options have been exhausted.
And the decision would be made at a national level by a federal official. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Handing over the farm from one generation to the next is probably the most difficult thing in farming. Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office shares some tips on how to make the transition go over well.
Over the course of every year, I get on a lot of farms, and many of those are multi-generation farms. And oftentimes some of the challenges there is that the older generation really isn't willing to give up control. And I'm not talking about kids that are 17 or 18 with parents that are in the 30s. Many times these are parents that are in their 60s and 70s, and the quote-unquote young generation is in their 40s and 50s. And I think I'm not trying to underestimate the challenge of trying to let go, but oftentimes I think there's a lot of conflict around these younger people that aren't so young anymore really want to start knowing what their future in the business is going to be, and that older generation holds on tight because they've been very successful. They really don't want to let go. But I'm really trying to talk to the older generation that even though it's probably one of the most emotionally challenging experience in any kind of business owner's life is to give up something you've really built, it's really important that you do that sooner than later if that future farm is going to be successful. So first of all, it's important to have a discussion early on with that younger generation. And if you're the right personality that you just will not let go, and it's your farm, you have the ability, you have the right to do that. I'm not saying you don't have that right if you want to continue to hold on to that farm until you just can't anymore. But I think it's important for you to share that then with the younger generation so they can plan their life accordingly and get ready for that. But if you want to turn it over, I think it's important to shift your perspective that you're not going to do the day-to-day management anymore. Someone else is going to do that. And you maybe can chip into the role of a coach. You have a lot of expertise. So think of yourself as being on the board, but not the day-to-day manager of that farm. So you're sitting on the board of directors, you're providing advice, you're really encouraging the younger generation, you're making sure they're successful. And I think that's an excellent role for an older generation. Learn to get another hobby, and that's the hardest thing. I think that's really hard for most of our farms. Your farms are your life, and they're your hobby. But I think it gets to be a point that it's a little bit easier if you develop a hobby. Get on some local boards, get on church boards. There's a lot of skills that translate from farming to being successful or helping some of these nonprofits. So I'd just like to encourage the older generation to really try to step back and allow this young, enthusiastic generation to really take control of some of these farms and make some of the decisions so that it really increases the likelihood that they'll be successful in the future. This has been Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension in St. Cloud.
Agriculture Department scientists have come up with a vaccine that could be used against avian influenza.
We hope we don't get to that, but we need to be prepared to use vaccine if we feel that our response efforts aren't sufficient.
And so Dr. T.J. Myers with USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service told us.
We have put out a request for proposal for vaccine manufacturers to prepare vaccines that we could purchase and stockpile in case we need to add that as a tool to our eradication efforts.
But even then, the decision to use vaccines would be a tough one to make. The USDA's chief veterinarian, Dr. John Clifford, told lawmakers that officials from many countries who buy U.S. poultry products have told him if we are forced to use vaccines,
they would stop all sales out of the U.S. until they've had adequate time to evaluate our actions.
So officials would have to weigh the possible loss of $4 billion in trade against the possible loss of more poultry flocks, putting the decision makers in a very
difficult situation.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack yesterday announced that the deadline to enroll for the Dairy Margin Protection Program for coverage in 2016 has been extended until November 20th. The voluntary program, which was established by the 2014 Farm Bill, provides financial assistance to participating farmers when the margin, which is the difference between the price of milk and feed costs, falls below the coverage level selected by the farmer. For more information on the Margin Protection Program or to enroll, contact your local FSA county office.